scrolling for a minute, I want to give you a mini sermon on Proverbs chapter 5, the dangers of immorality and the path to wisdom. You know, Proverbs 5 is a chapter where Solomon warns against the dangers of sexual immorality, particularly adultery. He contrasts the temporary pleasures of sin with long-term destruction that it brings. And this chapter is not just about avoiding sexual sin, but also about living with wisdom, self-control, and commitment to righteousness. It serves as a warning and an encouragement to stay faithful to God's path. So I'm going to quote verses 1 through 5 from the King James. It says, "My son, attend unto my wisdom, and bow thine ear to my understanding, that thou mayest regard discretion, and that thy lips may keep knowledge." It says, "For the lips of a strange woman drop as a honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil. For her end is as bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death, and her steps take hold on hell." Proverbs chapter 5, number one, there's the seduction of sin, verses 1 through 6. Solomon begins by urging his listener to pay attention to wisdom, because wisdom is our safeguard against any temptation. He describes the words of an immoral woman or sin in general as smooth and as sweet like honey. But in the end, she brings bitterness and destruction. This is verses 3 to 4. So this is a warning that sin often appears attractive at first, but its true consequences are devastating. The devil never shows the price tag of sin up front. He only highlights the temporary pleasure. However, verse 5 makes it clear. It says, "Her feet go down to death, her steps take hold on hell." The call to stay away, verses 7 through 14. Solomon pleads with his audience to avoid the path of destruction by not even going near temptation. He says, "Remove thy feet afar away from her, come not nigh to her house." That's in verse 8. He says, this means that we should not entertain sin, flirt with it, or place ourselves in compromising situations. Verses 9 through 11, they warn that giving into sin will lead to the loss of honor, wealth, and eventually deep regret. So people will take advantage of your weaknesses. In verse 9, you will suffer physically and financially. Verse 10, and at the end of your life, you will look back with regret, realizing pain you have caused yourself and others. Verses 11 through 14. Many people have found themselves trapped in addictions, broken relationships, and emotional pain because they did not heed these warnings. There's blessing in being faithful, verses 15 through 23. Rather than seeking pleasure in sinful ways, Solomon encourages faithfulness. He says, "Drink waters out of thine own cistern, and running waters out of thine own well," verse 15. This is a metaphor, of course. It represents enjoying intimacy with the bounds of marriage, or within the bounds of marriage. God designed marriage to be fulfilling and rewarding, but when people seek satisfaction outside of his design, it leads to destruction. Even I've experienced it myself. Verses 18 through 19 emphasizes the beauty of material love, while verses 20 through 21 reminds us that God sees everything. Nothing is hidden from him. He's never caught off guard or surprised. His own iniquities shall take the wicked himself, it says, and he shall be holden with the cords of his sins. That's in verse 22. Sin is like a trap. It entangles us and it becomes harder to escape. Ultimately, those who refuse to turn from their wicked ways will face destruction. And that's verse 23. And I'm quoting from King James and Solomon. He talks about foolishness. Proverbs is a clear warning about the dangers of giving into temptation, particularly sexual sin. However, the broader the message is about choosing wisdom self-discipline, and faithfulness in all areas of your life. Sin promises pleasure but delivers destruction. Wisdom protects while foolishness entraps. Faithfulness leads to blessings, while unfaithfulness brings regret. So let us seek wisdom, guard our hearts, and walk in righteousness, knowing that God's way leads to peace, joy, and true fulfillment. And I'm talking about Proverbs chapter 5. That was a mini sermon, King James Version.